Hello, thank you all for being here today. And thank you so much to the Calvó-Armengol Prize Committee, to the Barcelona School of Economics, and to the government of Andorra for this huge honor. I am truly delighted to be the recipient of this prize. And I never had the chance to meet Antoni Calvó-Armengol in person, very sadly, but I am an admirer of his research, and I have only heard the best things about him as a person from so many people. So today I wanted to briefly tell you about the research that has been rewarded by this wonderful prize. In a nutshell, I study the design of the tax system and in general of our public policies in order to better ensure productivity, growth, competition, while also raising revenues and reducing inequality. And taxes and transfers are really omnipresent in our lives, whether we notice them or not. Sometimes they're very visible. For instance, when we write a check to the government every year, sometimes they're very hard to notice. For instance, when we pay the sales tax in the US, which is added automatically on purchases. And taxes and transfers are really extremely powerful tools with numerous cascade effects. A well-designed tax and transfer system is one that raises revenues, perhaps redistributes income in a socially desirable way, but also tries to do this in terms of the lowest possible economic cost. So a badly designed tax system can be regressive, can hurt people with little ability to pay, and can also decrease productivity and economic activity. So it's really critical to get this right, especially in light of rising inequality in many countries and tightening government budgets all over the world. I try to approach this question from three different angles. The first two represent a lot of the work that economists do. They focus on the very important questions of, first, what policies such as taxes actually do, what are their effects, and two, how they should be designed based on economic observational data. The third angle that has proven to be extremely important too, and that I've been working on, is really to look at policy based on the perceptions of people and their understanding, their mental models. This uses novel methods, social economics surveys and experiments, and this is something we do at the social economics lab at Harvard, but that's a question for another time, hopefully. So as I mentioned, the first part of my work is on the dynamic long-term effects of taxation on savings, on wealth, on human capital, on innovation. Indeed, taxes can have really long-term, sometimes unexpected effects that are really important to take into account. So let me tell you about two specific studies here. The first is related to human capital, which means education. So this is an example paper that I can tell you about how we do this. So how should we finance human capital acquisition, formal education, college, job training throughout life? What is the right system that's made of taxes, perhaps subsidies, perhaps grants, etc.? In real life, people acquire education, but they also start with very different endowments, things like different health, different family backgrounds, different education up to that point. And then they also face a lot of risks throughout their lives, right? This can happen because of health shocks, because of labor market shocks, because of their skills depreciating. Think about trade shocks, or think about artificial intelligence at the moment. So there's lots of shocks that happen to us, and that would, even if we have a given education, make this more or less valuable over time. So the role of a government here would ideally be to try to both level the playing field between people from different backgrounds, being able to allow everyone to acquire an education, and also insure people against these major earnings risks that they face throughout their life. At the same time, the government wants to provide everyone with enough funds to invest in education and has to raise sufficiently many taxes, right? Sufficiently many revenues in order to make that system run without also completely discouraging work effort. So this is a tricky, tricky problem. And let's add another layer on that, which is also very realistic, which is that there is asymmetric information, which means the government cannot see partly what your income is due to, right? So imagine your income is the result of both your efforts as well as, your abilities or these, fundamental shocks that happen to you. But the government cannot really distinguish if someone has low income, is it because this person didn't work hard enough? Or is it because this person was very unlucky and, for instance, just had a bad health shock? So this is a fundamental, asymmetric information that's there between people and the government. And so there's really a fundamental trade-off between not discouraging work effort and investments in human capital and education on the one hand, and redistributing and insuring against the risks that people face throughout their life. So how do we tackle this problem? So this is what I do in this paper that builds this model and then tries to look at what is the optimal policy here. And what I show is that we could actually gain a lot from having income contingent education loans throughout life. So what that means in practice is that whenever people need to invest in their skills, whether this is when they're very young in college or later on the job when they need to replenish and sort of, re-update their skills, they can get a loan that will basically pay for that from the government. And then they're going to repay this according to a schedule that depends on how well they do. So people who have a higher income because they do very well are going to end up repaying a higher share of their income. And vice versa, people who do less well are going to repay a lower share. So there will both be insurance built into this repayment system and also redistribution, whereby, people with high sort of lifetime incomes and those that realize just good series of shocks throughout their life will pay more into this common pool than others who do poorly. So people who do poorly will actually be insured against this to some extent. And there's actually versions of these type of schemes in many countries, including Australia. There were versions of this in the UK, to some extent also a little bit in the US for people who go into the public service. But there's two key differences with what I propose. First, these loans should not only be available one time for college. Indeed, especially with lengthening life expectancy and with all these changes in technology and trade and globalization that are happening, it might actually be much more useful to have these throughout life, available throughout life. And second, another big difference to current systems is that currently we mainly insure your downside. So for instance, we tend to forgive student loans when things go really badly, as was, for instance, done during the COVID pandemic by the US government. But the scheme here, to be sustainable over the long run, also has this other feature, which is that when you do well, you also pay more. So it's not just the downside, it's also the upside that is taxed more. So another really important paper about taxes and long-term effects is related to taxes and innovation. And one big agenda that we had joined with co-authors is to really study how innovation happens and how it is influenced by the tax system. Because innovation really doesn't happen magically. We tend to think of inventors as being just in there for the love of science and very focused on innovation only. They don't care about economics or financial returns. But in practice, these are people, economic agents, and they typically also work for companies which are very much subject to economic incentives. So in a paper, what we do is to actually collect an enormous data set of all the patents in the US since basically the beginnings of these records. So we have data for the whole 20th century where we can see all the inventors, where they were, what they did, all of their patents, as well as the quality of their patents as measured by citations that these patents receive. And we can systematically study how personal and corporate taxation shaped innovation over this very long time span, using the fact that different states in the US had very different tax systems. And what we see is that taxes do play a really big role here too. Despite this idea that innovation might be a bit of a magical activity, we actually see that taxes do negatively affect both the quantity, the quality, and the location of innovation. So when a state has higher, say, corporate taxes, there'll be fewer inventors in the state, fewer patents, and a lot of the effect will come from basically people flowing out to other states. So there will be a bit of a zero-sum game between different states to attract innovation, and it will basically mean that states with the lower taxes are going to be able to attract a lot more resources. But very importantly, that's not the only thing that matters for innovation, and we're coming a bit full circle towards the first question, which was the tax system has to both raise revenue, but this is also used to finance very useful and important things. And in particular, here we see that things like amenities, like the research infrastructure and how many other inventors are around you in your field really matters too. So when a state spends on better infrastructure or to attract innovators, then it means that even if it has higher taxes, people will still want to stay there. So there's a dampening effect of having more amenities on the effect of taxes. So I hope that these are two interesting, illustrative projects of what I have done. And thank you again for this incredible prize. I am truly honored. And I thank you all very much.